Welcome, everybody, to the Dell Technologies podcast. We've got a super exciting guest here today, David Trigg, Vice President globally for the Telecom business unit at Dell Technologies, focusing on specialty, strategy, and a whole bunch of other things. Super thrilled to have you on here today. Excited to learn a bit more about what you do at Dell and how you're revolutionizing the telco business.
Great. Thanks, John. Ethan, nice to be with you all. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So we'd love to just hear your origin story to kick things off. What do you do at Dell? It was, a very long title that I just introduced you as. So tell us about what it is you actually do.
Yeah, I'm never quite sure how I explain what I do. So I do a little bit of everything. I've been very fortunate in my career because I've kind of had many roles under many different organizations. But for the telecom business unit, I run a couple different groups, but the primary ones are the specialty organization, which are the technical experts on a variety of different topics, everything from OSS, BSS to the RAN and everything in between, and work with the telcos and making sure that we understand their business and how can we help provide infrastructure and services and solutions that meet their needs. I also run operations for the business unit and have been involved and helped kind of develop the strategy along the way. So I've sort of touched a lot of parts of it.
That's awesome. Well, we've been partnered with Dell for quite a while now. And when I first heard about the telco business unit, I was really interested, and we're really excited to be partnered with you guys as well to bring solutions specifically to the telco industry. But one of the things that was fascinating to me as I started to learn more about what you guys did is I think it's rather unique in that you actually built out a separate division specifically focused on serving these telco customers. And at least coming into it from the outside, there was definitely a lot of vernacular that we had to learn and become familiar with as it relates to what it is that you guys do. So, tell us a little bit about the origin around the telco business unit and what the strategy around building that and dedicating resources and expertise and talent to the space has been.
Yeah. It's probably 7, 8, maybe even 10 years ago. Telcos started to go through the process of disaggregating their network. And when I speak, I'm mostly talking about the things that operate and run their network. And for most telcos, especially wireless providers, but even wireline providers, that's their bread and butter, right? And so as they've been running and operating their networks, they used to be basically siloed monolithic stacks. And over the last 7, 8, 10 years, they were a little behind the IT industry as they started to virtualize, containerize, separate the application from the infrastructure, all things that we at Dell have been helping enterprises do for a very long time. So it started to look and feel very similar to what we did as a company. But to your point, the language was different, the workloads were different. So at that time, we formed a relatively small group to really start to investigate what was going on and really understand the technology and what was needed, because what goes into a telco network is similar to what we build, but slightly different. And then we realized about 5 years ago that that small group wasn't meeting the needs of the opportunity that was starting to present itself. Because as 5G started to come on, that was starting to happen at the radio, which is where a lot of the money goes in. And the radio was starting to disaggregate the applications were getting, again, containerized, virtualized, the interfaces were getting standardized. Now, still early days in a lot of that, but it was allowing telcos to run, deploy, and operate, or I should start even different, deploy, run, and operate their networks very differently. And because of that, it was starting to open up an opportunity for Dell that is massive. And we realized that we needed to have an organization, which was very unique for Dell. Dell tends to build horizontal capability that can be adopted for many different cases. But it was one of the first times that Dell really built a vertically oriented or an industry oriented organization to meet the needs of telcos, because those applications are very performance dependent. The language is a little bit different. The technology is slightly different. What needs to be built out in massive scale deployments around the world. Most telcos were regulated, if not still regulated. So the cost of failure is very expensive. And so we started this business unit about 4 years ago to start to build and focus on selling into telcos networks primarily. And then obviously over the last 24 months, we've seen the onslaught of AI starting to come in and see that as a massive opportunity as well.
David, question for you. As an expert on living this, it's funny. I've watched over the last couple of years actually the skyline change of Austin. You got the old they're everywhere. 5G are you can see the towers.
Yep.
They're very prominent. There was a lot of buzz, as always, with the new technology, like 5G is going to change the world. From the industry perspective, is it going the same way that the people expected, the industry expected? Are we getting the full value out of 5G? You mentioned early days still. What are you seeing?
Well, there was multiple promises of 5G.
Yeah.
And as is probably not too dissimilar, and I was fortunate for a big part of my cloud, I was focused on the cloud kind of revolution. And very early on, the hype didn't live up to, the promise. Or the promise didn't live up to the hype, probably a better way to say it.
Yeah.
And so there was multiple things that 5G was supposed to do. One was it was supposed to bring new revenue streams for the telcos. And that was one of the biggest. They're supposed to be able to deploy, supposed to be able to monetize. And I can tell you, most telcos around the world have really struggled with monetizing their networks in a new way based upon the 5G technology. So every telco around the world, some more than others, are still very focused on how do they generate new revenue. And this is where AI is becoming exciting too, because it's just another wave of technology that maybe they can monetize. But that side of it, I don't think it has lived up to the promise that was delivered. The other promise is they were going to be able to deploy their networks faster and less expensive. And we're seeing telcos that do adopt it are able to deploy their networks faster and less expensive. But right now, the main comparison is a capital comparison. And it's not necessarily cheaper from a capital perspective. But when you look at all of the components of cost, including operations, how to run it and operate it, we are seeing significant benefit. It's just hard for telcos to discreetly call out those expenses. So even on that side, I think there's hints of success, but not wide-scale success. And that's why we're seeing a little bit of the adoption of the new technology, the new ways to deploy has been a little bit slower than I think anyone would predict. But now, obviously, with the onslaught of AI, being able to deploy, run, and operate your network in more of a kind of a horizontal cloud, it starts to bring together the data sources, so that they can actually leverage some of the promise of AI that's coming along. And so they're kind of realizing, so a lot of telcos are dealing with the reality that they still have some very old technology in their networks around the world. There's still some 2G and 3D networks that are deployed around the world, and they have to continue to run and operate them for multiple reasons, everything from emergency services to regulations, et cetera, and just customer adoption. So that's why I say it's early days. We continue to see hints of opportunities around these things. It just hasn't quite developed as fast. The industry tends to be fairly slow anyways. And we can talk a little bit about that. And that's where I think AI can help is, they'll test for, 12, 24, even 36 months, right? Like, can you imagine doing a testing? That's very different than what we see in the IT space, right? And before they put something to run and operate on their network. So we could deploy a technology today. They may test it for 2 or 3 years before they even start to deploy it. So the adoption within telcos is very risk adverse. They want to make sure it works to the nth degree and that they know all of the iterations. Because again, as I said earlier, the cost of failure can be and is very expensive because a lot of these companies are highly regulated and they provide critical services.
Yeah, one of the things that I found fascinating, my dad worked in the security space for a while and did work with some of these telcos. And there was a story that stuck with me particularly that I thought was just fascinating, that one of the installations was like out crazy in the middle of nowhere on the top of this super tall mountain. I think it was in California somewhere. And it would take a person who had to come in and service this tower over 6 hours to get up to the top of the tower, one way. And one of the biggest issues that they had, of course, was theft, right? Because people would go in and they'd steal the copper in these sites. And because it was out in the middle of nowhere, there was like no way to, really secure these facilities. And so it was just fascinating to me that, you could have such a remote deployed location that is critical for providing service to the nearby areas. But the fact that, like, to your point on these things need to be tested and validated for years to make sure that they work. It's places like that that I think, oh, well, yeah, obviously that totally makes sense because, if you got something that breaks and the only way to get there to fix it is to drive, 12 hours round trip, not including the time that it's going to take to actually make the repair, you suddenly have to have something that's extremely reliable, extremely stable. And so, I know that Dell has an amazing track record as it comes to edge compute and extended lifecycle hardware and things like that from the work that we've done with the OEM team. So tell us a little bit about how your expertise as Dell is coming into play with some of these, more complicated requirements that the telcos have.
Yeah, we at Dell, when we've built out this strategy around the business case, we knew it needed to be multifaceted. So first and foremost, we started with what we do and what we do really well. So we had to start to understand the infrastructure requirements that are required to go deploy these large scale, highly distributed networks. To your point, John, a telco network can be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of locations. So even though they're still deploying what can be compute or hardware, how you service it, how you maintain it, the SLAs around it are all very, very different. And the requirements can be significantly different. Everything from temperature ranges to depths and, reliability that has to be built into it. And so we had to start with what we do well. And so we started really looking at what infrastructure is required. We rolled out, the XR8000, which is a sled-based platform that is great for the edge, that allows for multiple use cases, high redundancy, extended temperature range. So we started with what we're good at. But then we started to layer on top of there, making sure that we had the services. We had to look at our services and our services capability, not only with what we did traditionally, but really understanding the workloads and the requirement of the workloads that telco has. Running a RAN or a core or the OSS BSS systems that run and power, the workloads that run and power our network are highly complex. And it's amazing what goes into making a phone call work from a cell or a wireline. And so we started to make sure that we expanded and focused on our services. Then we started to look at okay, well, then what can we provide on top of that? And making sure that we provided some of the automation that's required to go deploy. Because again, as you highlighted, John, some of these locations are very remote. They're deploying 10,000 locations at a time. So the automations that require to go deploy, it's very different than a large data center deployment, which Dell does every single day. So we started to layer on the automation capabilities. And then we decided that we needed to basically put that together and package that. And so we started to work with some of the CAS vendors, Wind River and Red Hat, making sure that we could deploy, what we call, and the industry calls, kind of a base telco cloud that they could use across their network. So we've launched InfraBlocks. And then, the final thing that we really knew we had to do was we had to enable the ecosystem. And so we had to bring in the partners because, again, as I keep mentioning, the workloads are very different. It's not your traditional databases, it's not your traditional ERPs, whatever. The workloads are very different from the Ericssons, the Nokias, the Amdocs. And we had to work with the ecosystem, and we had to have a place where the ecosystem could come together and help hopefully accelerate the adoption and the testing and the confidence. And so we developed our OTEL labs. We call it the Open Telecom Ecosystem Lab, but it is a place, but it's also a little bit more of a service that we can have companies come together and prove out that this technology, this new way to deploy, actually works and works well across the ecosystem. And so we're having to work with telcos as they're wanting to do some of these things, but are unsure or nervous. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? And in the industry, you see some of the telcos that are really leading the space. You see a lot of telcos that sort of sit back and watch and follow. And we've done a lot of studies on that as well. So that gives you kind of hopefully some themes of what we've had to go do to really go enable this ecosystem. And then finally, I'll mention, I'm guessing we'll probably get there as well, is then now with the adoption of Dell AI, we've recently launched our Dell AI capabilities for telcos, leveraging the frameworks that we've done with NVIDIA around the Dell AI factory, and really how do we incorporate that into the things that we had already begun doing. And again, it's relatively early days for the Dell AI. I shouldn't even say it that way. It's early days for telcos AI adoption. And they're just learning about where and how and what and all that fun stuff.
Now, I would say it's early days for AI, period. I mean, John and I are in this space on the software side, and it's changing so fast. Every week there's a new update or a new innovation. We were talking earlier, we were talking about the 5G. There was a huge bet on how to monetize that network, a lot of use cases. Even when I was at Dell, we were talking about private access area networks and all these things you can do with the technology for the bandwidth. But I do think, as we're just talking through this, AI is probably that engine that's going to help not only the industry, corporations, the telco providers start to really monetize those capital investments. Because with AI, it provides a whole new paradigm. You always say data is valuable, but with AI, you can't really do without it. I mean, it is. We always say data is valuable. With AI, you're only as good as your data. And with this last mile network, the cell network, I see that cost, the economics of it, the value, the control point even goes up. So I'd just be curious, what are you all seeing from your end, how customers and both providers are seeing the cell network play in the AI space?
Well, there's multiple discussions that are all connected. One is, and Dell tends to use the on, in, and with nomenclature, right? That we tend to use. So they're looking at where can they deploy AI on their network, right? And how can they optimize their network so that AI works better and as customers adopt AI. Not too dissimilar. The telcos did a lot to optimize some of the cloud deployments. And, I grew up in the cloud area. Most cloud deployments failed, not because of the cloud deployments, because they didn't really think through the network side of it, right?
That's true.
And I was on so many where you just had conflict with networks on the cloud deployment. So really working with telcos on how do they deploy on. I'll jump to the with as well. And as we're working with telcos on how do we help deploy AI capabilities with them to help them provide a monetization opportunity. And, telcos have struggled, not every telco everywhere, to find new ways or new capabilities to sell and have success with those. Some telcos are way more innovative than others in their ability to sell new capabilities. But a lot of them that are selling wireless and wireline, it's a pretty big jump to then selling advanced services. And so we're working with a lot of telcos, and we believe that they will be successful, in certain geos in certain parts of the world, but, probably won't be successful everywhere, So we're kind of working with telcos. How can they use AI to, have new stuff to sell? And then finally, I'll kind of talk about the in. And this is where probably most of the conversation that me and my team are involved with is how do they use AI in their network to improve operations, improve services, improve customer support, improve billing, all of the parts. Because, Ethan, as you highlighted, data is the center of gravity. As I mentioned earlier on, telcos have traditionally built kind of siloed monolithic stacks to run different parts of their network. Well, one of the results of doing that is the data siloed as well. So we're having to start to work with telcos on just a data strategy, right? And making sure, how do you get access to that data? How do you leverage that data? How do you use it for multiple purposes? And I always give the example, I grew up career-wise in a telco for a long time, and I actually ran their credit and collections. And our CEO was going to meet with a customer. The customer literally was three initials. I won't tell the customer name, but it was literally three initials. He came to me and said, "Hey, can you tell me how much revenue we do with this customer?" I went to search for it. We spelled those three initials 86 different ways in our billing systems. And so as, letter dot letter space like, and it was, I always kind of felt like it was one of the first big data projects I ever did, because you just realized how complex some of these systems are when they're monolithic and separate. So it's that's why it's going to take a while to really learn how to leverage the data that we can go after.
And you said something that resonated with me a lot, as I don't think people realize the world of AI. It's a new workload in essence, but it's about the network, silly. It without it being networked properly, you're not going to get there. And it's that important to have the connection layers work and be thought through. And the stovepipe methodologies aren't going to scale, and it won't work. We see a lot just in the space that we're in, just for companies trying to just take advantage of AI. They're really having to go back to square one. It's not an easy button. It's really a data management and a data architecture problem, and it's a networking problem. It goes back to the foundation, the fundamentals. It's networked intelligence is what we're dealing with in some cases.
Well, and obviously Dell's legacy, and obviously Dell's acquisition of EMC back in the day, we're very data mindful of where data has lived. And traditionally it lived in an enterprise data center. Then it, migrated a little bit to the public cloud. Now it's kind of finding its space. But the third front is emerging, which is the edge, of where most data is being generated.
That's right.
And it's too expensive, and takes too much time to move the data to where the compute is. So you have to have the compute where the data is to be able to do, especially the inferencing, to really do making the quick decisions. You can move data for learning, and most companies at this point are in the learning phases of AI development. They're gathering large data sets. And that's okay. You can move those and put those in a single location with mass GPU farms. But when it starts to become really how quickly can you move, how quickly can you make decisions based upon those learnings, it's got to be at the edge. And that's why you see, Dell obviously launching even laptops with NPUs, and, you're seeing cell phones with AI capability embedded in it. It's the edge is a little bit just, the edge is different for everyone. It just depends on your perspective. For some, it's the cell phones. For some, it's the laptop. For some, it's the edge of the telco network, So it's just it's one of those, which we love in our industry, generic terms that, can mean 10 things by 10 different people. So,
yeah, we see a huge opportunity for AI at the edge, and we're actually working, as with Dell on a couple of these things that are pretty cool. We've got both strategies around that data center approach, like you said, because there are just going to be things that are going to need to live there. But at the edge, we're doing a couple of really cool things for the audience that are pretty neat. The first one is we have a AI chat GPT like solution. It's more capable, but it can run 100% locally and air gapped, and it can run on either one of the Dell AI PCs or it can run on something like an XR8000. So the idea is if you're at one of these remote sites and you need to figure out how to do some kind of maintenance or repair for something, you can actually have a AI that's like a chat GPT, but trained on your own data. It's 100% air gap, no connectivity required. They can help guide you through the process of doing that maintenance and restoration or whatever action needs to be taken with all of the institutional knowledge of your enterprise and crowdsourced across your other network engineers or whoever servicing these devices to be able to tap into this deep expertise. So that's one of the things we're super excited about. And then the other one that's really cool, more so on that data center side, is around call center service and support. So, we all call in, hopefully not too often, to our telco providers with some kind of issue or need for help or something like that. And, inevitably we get somebody that sometimes they're super helpful, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. But in all cases, we know that the telcos, they want to provide a great customer experience as the top priority. And so one of the big challenges there is things like call center quality assurance, right? You actually today still have to pick up the phone and either manually listen in live or listen to one of the recordings of somebody speaking to a customer and scoring and doing that scoring criteria. And we're doing this with a number of different customers with Dell, where the big challenge is that you've got 20 different criteria for your scoring mechanism, and then based on what criteria that person hits, you can give them a good, a bad, needs improvement type of thing. Well, the issue is there may only be like enough people to listen to those calls to cover like 2 to 5% of all the calls that are coming in. And especially for these massive telcos where you've got literally millions and millions of calls happening every single month, it's impossible to do a good job of doing that QA. So one of the things we're really excited to be partnered with Dell on is using the XE9680 and the Dell AI Factory as the platform. We can actually use our technology to take those call recordings, transcribe them into text, and then process that text using large language models to extract all of the key information that the QA teams would want to evaluate those calls for, whether that's did the person provide their agent ID and ask for the full name of the person and their address for like compliance reasons, or did they follow the run book that ultimately resolved the issue, or maybe the agent has a better way of conducting that service and ultimately fixing that person's issue that isn't documented, but we can actually use AI to extract those insights and circle back to say, hey, the agent did this, and they've got a resolution rate of 98% versus the run book has a resolution rate of 80% and things like that. So just one fun number that we've done some calculations on. One 9680 server, which has 8-way GPUs, NVIDIA H100s, we can process 1 million calls in 14 days with one server. Right. So now you can get that a massive scale, which we're really excited about. So it's a great partnership.
Yeah, I don't think there's a human on the planet that hasn't been frustrated by some customer service interaction, right? And so the opportunity to improve upon that is so massive, whether you're talking to an airline or a retail outfit or whatever, right? We've all been through those, hotel, it's can be so frustrating. And I think it's pushed, obviously through COVID and, more of the online era, it's pushed more and more people. Like I'd almost rather not deal with a human because they can be so frustrating. But when you need to, you really need to, and you hope that they are the experts and can find the information and get you the answer. And, I'm sure all of us have been transferred multiple times. And, when that happens to me, a little bit of my, bitter old man kicks in where I'm like, I'm going to stick on until like, I don't care if it takes me 4 hours and it can be a small issue. Like it becomes principle over, the pride kicks in a little bit, and there's so much opportunity to improve on this space. And I think I'm hopeful that, again, that's some of the promise of AI, that it can just enable the space. Because as you all know, most chat agents are, decision tree logic based, right? So if you follow the logic, it works great. As soon as you get outside the logic, you're lost in never land. And it's hard to return from never land sometimes on some of those calls.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's the promise, though. That's where AI is going to add a lot of value in the near term because the technology is advancing so fast. Where your experience, I recently got as everyone in the United States, the newer version of the advanced voice activated GPT.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know about you, but always friendly, always kind, never tired, and always available.
Yeah.
I mean, and can you imagine corporations like you, David? Why do you have to wait 4 hours?
Yeah.
It should be an instantaneous call center engagement. That to me, how many man hours it will be freed up when you can just handle your resolution through voice activation without having to wait in the queue. Whether you're talking to a telco provider or just the local store. So I see tons of goodwill happening there. And we always said, like AI, people are always worried about it. It's gonna disrupt certain types of roles, but it's gonna free up kind of higher value activities for all of us. That's what I hope happens with the world of AI. Yeah,
well,
use it for good.
Yeah, we're fortunate that we've got, obviously we haven't lived through all of these swings, but there was the Industrial Revolution, and we've seen multiple phases of this. Then the compute era kick in, and it displaced a ton of jobs. But
there were new ones.
People found new jobs in new areas, and the unfortunate part of that, sometimes it does take. It's not instantaneous, but it takes a little bit of time. And obviously, we saw a lot of activity over the last week, of people trying to change the outcome of some of that. And, it's an important discussion to have and make sure that we work through it intelligently and leverage it for good. But, as Michael's famous for saying, we are technology optimists, and we see what the good can do and see how it can change lives, people's for the better. And quite frankly, this might, if it allows you to get trained on demand, if it allows you to get the information instantaneous, it can level the playing field. You don't quite have to have such a skilled workforce to be able to provide a good outcome. And so it can change a little bit of, maybe democratize a little bit of the access to the information, how it gets used. It's going to be an interesting evolution.
Well, I think there are a couple of cool things that come to mind as you're saying that, because I totally agree with you. There was a big revolution in the telco space many years ago with telegrams. All right, we went from doing this on a little device with beeps and boops to talking on landlines, to talking wirelessly, to now 5G. And I see this AI thing as just the next evolution of that. And to your point, I think Ethan and I have talked about this a lot too. In a lot of ways, I see the AI revolution as being the faster, more capable version of the internet revolution. Right? We saw the same kind of thing with the early days of search engines, and just the ability to find information at your fingertips through something like a Google search versus having to go to a library and using a microfiche or something like that to find an old news article. And now it's just there. And now we're at the point with AI where you can effectively type in what you're looking for, and it will scour the entire world of information, every medical research paper, every technical report, every news article, and it will serve up something to you in a matter of a couple of seconds that is, at least right now, pretty good. Right? We still have to worry about hallucinations a little bit, and you got to make sure that things are okay. But provided you have the skills to do that fact checking and validation, like to your point, the democratization of this information. I've seen so many stories where there are people who have like these undiagnosable health issues and they don't know what to do. They've been to all these different doctors, and then they go to something like a chat GPT or an equivalent, and they type in all their symptoms, and it comes back with saying, have you looked into these 5 things? And lo and behold, one of those things is some crazy, rare, very limited documentation thing that actually ends up being the thing that the person has. And I think that's just an amazing thing, because otherwise, that person's got a very short clock on their life. And this is a true story. This happened. This was actually in the early days. It was like a year and a half ago, maybe 6 months after ChatGPT was released. There were stories like that coming out. So I think it's a super fascinating and exciting time. And there are just so many benefits. And I think that one of the things that we're really excited about from the Dell partnership perspective is you guys do a great job at really focusing on the optimistic side of the technology and providing a platform while also providing the expertise to say, this is how you can use this technology and be a force for good to benefit your customers, benefit society as a whole, and do it in a way that's going to be additive to the world. And I think that's just an awesome thing. So
that's good.
One of the other questions that I had for you, David, was, we're recording this about a week after the Hurricane Helene, and I know some people that have been massively affected, especially in the communications, in terms of like network outages and things like that. And I know it's not has anything directly to do with you guys at Dell, but one of the things I'd be curious about is, as you think about these natural disasters and, thinking back to that super remote cell tower on the middle of a mountain somewhere that somebody had to drive 6 hours to get to. Talk to us a little bit about like Dell's strategy around the supply chain and how you guys are able to get the right equipment into these people's hands for things like this rapid response. I've got stories I can't share from back in the day when my dad worked at Dell, where they were able to support the federal government in amazing ways with rapid response. So talk to me a little bit about how the supply chain at Dell is really helping and an advantage to the telcos.
Well, one of the true assets of our company, we always say we have people and technology and capabilities, but one of the true assets that Michael and Jeff and the leadership team have built is our supply chain, and we've seen the benefit of it several times in recent history on our ability to source parts, be able to have a diverse supply chain, to be able to respond to natural or just even more generic disasters very quickly. And obviously, most recently for me was during COVID. The world shifted overnight to a work from home, call centers were closing down, and we had to deploy hundreds of thousands of laptops to people to be able to keep the world running and be able to keep orders processing and systems up and all of that. And our supply chain, although I'd say not perfect, 'cause I don't think anybody was perfect, I don't believe in perfect, it held up phenomenal. And we were able to do Herculean things to be able to supply companies and enterprises and most importantly, people. And then, in natural disasters, it does come around. Do you have the ability to provide capability to people when it's needed? And through our, we are in most geos around the world, have capabilities in most geos, and we're very fortunate that has been a strategic decision point for Dell to continue to focus on, and probably may not be the thing that you think about most when you're buying infrastructure to support your hardware, but in times when it matters, it really matters. And I think customers have seen and learned that. So it's been an interesting journey and learning for me, because it's a side I'm probably less aware of than some that have been in Dell a long time. But yeah, it's been a great story and helps us as we talk about these telco networks have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of locations, and be able to supply them and even just spare parts is a massive undertaking. And having the redundancy, because telco's heritage back to disasters is nothing in your house, nothing in your neighborhood, nothing in your community could be working, but you pick up the phone and the phone always worked. And that heritage still comes through for good and for bad. Sometimes, it'd be nice to, leave a little bit, I call it the 5 9s. They're used to 5 9 mentality. And so they built everything twice, and the phones would work, but they still very much have that mentality. But also that mentality has hurt them, because we were talking about some of the trends. I've seen twice in my career where I've had engineers tell me that quality will beat out ease twice. And I'll give you 2 examples. One is I've had hundreds of engineers when I was in the telco world say nobody will disconnect a landline for a cell phone. Cell phones don't work as well. They're glitzy, they drop. And that's still true today, right?
Yeah.
And how many millions of landlines have been disconnected? The other area I've had it was when I started getting into cloud and cloud computing. Nobody will let go of their server. Nobody will put their data in somewhere where they don't know where their data's gone. How much data has gone into a place where people don't know where their data is located. And so, ease of deployment, ease of adoption, ease of technology. And that's where I see something, and we talked about a little bit with AI. I think it's going to make a lot of this a lot easier, but you do really have to pay attention to quality, security, performance, the things that do really matter, because when they matter, they really matter. And we've seen that, you were mentioning the cybersecurity world, right? Like when it matters, it matters a lot.
Yeah, it's critical infrastructure, right? And that goes down. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
One of the things, and I know, Ethan, you lived and breathed this when you were on the OEM team at Dell, but just the amount of care that Dell has put into securing that supply chain, and even how they scan the boards to make sure that like all the parts are what they should be and that they're in the right location. It's just fascinating.
Oh yeah, it's a machine in itself. The counterfeiting, the actual parts that we use, the complexity of the supply chain, they have it down to it's not just a science for Dell. And a lot of people underestimate it. I know during the pandemic, it really came through, our ability to deliver, ship, and get parts and goods where they needed to be. And we didn't miss a beat. It's funny in marketing, we joke, we'd always market that it's about the supply chain or capability, but it actually came through in resounding proof points for our OEMs that we are their supply chain. And we're like, yeah, we actually meant what we said in the marketing material. It's real fact based. So it was good to see that come to life. David, one question I had for you, and this is kind of on the lighter side. What did you go to school for? And are you doing what you studied to go to school for, and as a living?
Yeah, sort of. I've been very, very fortunate in my career because I've got to do a lot of roles, a lot of things, and touch a lot of parts of businesses. And I love business, right? Like I've been very fortunate the last 10, 15 years working for Dell EMC to travel the world and to see that business is business. It's done different cultures, different ways. I've been very fortunate. But I went to the University of Colorado. I have a very large legacy. My parents went there. I've got 2 kids there right now. So I born and raised and loved Colorado. I was a big skier, but I studied finance, and although they didn't have a minor, they did I did kind of a minor in civil engineering. So I always wanted to be able to understand the technology, but I knew I didn't want to do technology day in and day out. I like the business side of technology. I thought I wanted to go in construction and development. So I'm not doing exactly what I'm doing. But I'm certainly been very lucky in roles where I've kind of had GM type roles where I'm able to touch different parts of the business. So I go from a finance conversation to a marketing conversation to an engineering conversation. I don't know if my attention span's not that great or what it is, because I like to be able to touch all parts and see how businesses come together and how they succeed and fail and grow and decline. And I've been a part of successful ones and part of failures. And you probably actually learn more from your failures than you do the success. But yeah, I've been very fortunate because I never had the 10-year plan. I just kind of worked my butt off and tried to do a really good job. and just keep after it. And I got very lucky, and I'm very fortunate to have the job I have and to work for a company like Dell Technologies, and continue to see major shifts and change and and how people live and run their lives and live and run businesses. It's been fun. So it's probably a longer answer than you're looking for there, Ethan.
No, it's great.
That's
Very-
awesome. I have a follow-up for you along those lines, David. So with this whole change that we're seeing with AI and technology accelerating, you mentioned you got two kids doing the whole college thing. What advice would you give to younger people, say people who are in high school or looking at entering college or just about to graduate or get their first job? What advice would you give to them as it relates to just your experience in navigating a successful career, but then also how things like these monumental technology shifts may play a role in how they think about what they should be doing and what skills they should be pursuing?
Yeah, I think part of college, and my parents were very big advocates of this, part of college is learning how to learn. Um, and so if you're constantly learning, I touch everyday technology that I know nothing about. But if you can remain curious, our world's changed a lot. And I felt like I had to keep up with it for a long time. And I realized it's changing so fast now, I don't feel like I have to keep up with it. But I want to stay relevant, but it's fascinating to learn all the technology. But I think there's some foundational things. I fundamentally believe that confidence goes a long way. If you can, not cocky, but if you can be confident, I see a lot of people that, hate to say it this way, that aren't that intelligent, but are highly successful just because they believe they can do it. So I believe most kids are smart enough, right? So if you're confident that you can do it, you can go do it. The second thing is equally probably as important. You got to have a work ethic, work hard. And that's becoming more and more important. You got to work hard. And then the third thing that I always focus on is kind of what I call resilience. I'm a big resilience guy, which there's a couple components of it. Don't be afraid to fail. A lot of kids going through college, going through high school, they come out of it with this perfect mentality. And a lot of them maybe have never failed, right? Like they've gotten good grades, they've played on good sports teams, they've gotten the school scholarship that they wanted. A lot of these kids have never failed, so they're afraid to fail. I've mentor a lot of people, and I'm always grateful to do that. And I tell them, pick 10 projects and fail on one or two of them. Obviously, probably not the biggest ones, but you learn more by failing and failed projects. Like it's important. Part of any company, any development is learning to fail. And a big part of resilience is failure, but also focusing on what you can control. And there's a good book written about resilience, and we talked a lot about in the mortgage days, 90% of the equation they weren't in control of. The mortgage rates were high, the home prices were diving, everything was hard. But the people that focused on that 10% that they control, how many calls they made, they were highly successful. All the people that sat around and complained about the 90% that they couldn't control failed. So don't sit around and talk about stuff you can't control. Focus on the things that you can control. And the things with AI, as we see the world change, the skill sets are going to have to change. You're going to have to keep learning. But if you're confident, you work hard, and you focus on what you can control, you'll adjust, you'll adapt, you'll be okay. And the world's going to need more people like that. I think it's going to become less from what I would call a knowledge worker to a knowledge questioner. People that can ask good questions, people that are inquisitive. That's going to be the secret of AI, is what questions you ask of it. And how do you really take advantage of it? So, I mean, that's just my relatively simple philosophy. But, if you can work hard, and the final thing I would add, because this is a huge component for me, is work's not always fun, not always easy. Business is not always fun, not always easy, but have some fun. Don't take it too seriously. Like, have some fun, try to make it fun. Our industry is going through massive change, and there's days that are brutal right now. But you got to make the best of it and try to have some fun. Because quite frankly, that's sort of the reason we're all here.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
David, that concept of the fear of failure and just leaving that at the door early in life, and just realize if you're not failing, you're probably not trying. You're probably not testing yourself. If you're going to be a super high performer, and the people that build businesses, and you mentioned you learn more in your failures than you do in your successes. So to be a resilient human being and someone that that's going to have a high impact in the industry, to encourage those young kids that, like, you don't have to be a perfectionist. In fact, that's going to slow you down. If everything has to be perfect, you're probably not going to be a high success long term. So I'm a big believer.
Yeah, I got a lot of nieces and nephews coming out of college right now, and all of them are anxious to go make money. All of them are anxious to go get that perfect job.
Yeah.
I'm like, when you're young, when you're in your early 20s, it's probably the best time not to have a steady income, right? Because for a lot of them, not everyone, they can fall back and go live with their parents if they need to. It's kind of the best time to be broke and go try some things, do some things, take some risks, because they probably haven't, because not most, but a lot of kids have kind of followed. I went to high school. I got good grades. I played sports. I did science projects. I was part, this debate team. Then I went to college and I did all the extracurricular activity. And so to go try new things is an important lesson. And some of my most successful, and I wish I did a little bit more of this when I was a kid, most successful friends are the ones that kind of went off, and especially in this AI world, they're going to be inventing new businesses, new opportunities that, quite frankly, nobody can show them. Like their elders, I can't show them how to do that. So go try some stuff, do some stuff, learn it, work hard, and don't be afraid of failure. I think it's a hard time for kids right now because there's not as many jobs right now for a lot of the kids coming out of school. So it's a little bit of a hard time, but it's also a time to kind of go experiment.
Yeah. Great time to be young too. Like you said, a lot of people are stressed out, but this is a perfect time. And for the kids going into high school or college, we're in the early innings here. And we were talking to John on previous podcasts. I've been through a few of these big changes, client server cloud, the client server cloud. AI is making them all look like we were just practicing. I mean, I don't think people understand how transformative what we are. I mean, I think people know, because there's this healthy fear as you walk around. People, big companies, small companies, they know we're changing. The world's changing in front of our eyes right now. But I think it's an exciting time. And like you said, there are businesses that we haven't even thought of yet that are going to be created probably being created right now while we're on this podcast.
Yeah.
And so.
Right. Exactly right. So.
Yeah. Well, David, really appreciate you taking the time. This was a lot of fun. Very excited to just hear more about the origin story of what Dell's doing in the telco space. And I love the insights and perspective that you've given, especially on, how to kind of succeed in life a little bit for these younger kids. I think it's great. I totally agree with what you said. And it was great having you on. Really appreciate it.
John, thanks for your time. Thanks for letting me be on. It's fun, and hopefully some of these things resonate, but it's an exciting time to be in the industry, and I don't claim to have all the answers, but it's fun to be working through them with smart people and being a part of a great company like Dell Technologies. So I'm very fortunate to be here, so I appreciate the time.
Likewise.
Thank you again.